Hello, I'm Peter Holmes, and this is Capitalism and Why We Need to Get Over It, Part 1. Just a couple of things before we start. The first is if you want to follow the text, you'll find it at Amazon. Unfortunately, they want a small fee. It wasn't my idea, but the man needs to make a living. Second, there are no visuals, so if you'd rather just listen to this rather than look at me, you can do so. What I'm going to do is go through the document, go through the text, and stop every now and then to expand some things, explain them, and so on and so forth, which I hope in a way that will help. And last, in order to make it all more digestible, I've broken it up into parts. So this is Capitalism and Why We Need to Get Over It, Part 1. Chapter 1, Introduction. Many of us question the way our societies work. Some of us are comfortable, but we all know there's poverty, pollution, war, and waste, and they seem inevitable. The system we live under, one that produces great wealth for some, but under which poverty, pollution, war, and waste persist, is capitalism. And we're supposed to believe that for all its faults, capitalism is the fairest and most efficient economic system. The story goes, whatever is good for business is good for all of us. Capitalists are benevolent wealth creators who risk their money to provide us with jobs. Inequality is regrettable, but inevitable and justifiable, a price worth paying for the benefits of economic growth. The purpose of this capitalist ideology is to justify the system by disguising its injustice with lies dressed up to look like common sense. Of course, capitalism is not responsible for all of our social problems, and some of them were around long before the system developed. But we need to overcome them, and capitalism prevents us from doing so. We must know what's wrong with something before we can change it for the better. So we need to understand how capitalism works and why it harms us. Then we can work out how to improve things. However, my purpose is not to propose an alternative to capitalism, but only to show why we need one. The case against capitalism is both economic and moral. Because it creates and relies on economic inequality, capitalism is not the most socially efficient productive system. And this inherent inequality is why it's an immoral system. This argument is not original. Criticism of capitalism is as old as the system itself. My aim is just to simplify and clarify the issues. If what I say only makes you think and argue, then that's a start. And here's something to get you going. Capitalism is legal, organised crime. Together we'll crack it. Chapter 2, Social Production. And let me just say here that what I'm going to do now is go through, as it were, the economic basics. In order to, as it were, set out my stall. And what I'm going to say here in this next section, and to the end of this part of the text, is going to be, as it were, the foundation or the groundwork on which everything else will depend or hang, okay? So, social production. Capitalism is one way of organising production. But every system has to deal with the same economic facts. So it helps to understand the facts if we want to understand how capitalism works and why it can't work equally well for all of us. First part, production. To survive, we must produce food, clothes, and shelter. We need these basics before we can produce anything else. But to make progress, we need other good things, such as healthcare, education, a clean environment, entertainment, and opportunities in life. The more of the basics and better things we have, or the better their quality, the better we live. For most of human history, we struggled to produce even the basics. We simply weren't productive enough. Only our rulers could enjoy the few better things that were available. And for many people in the world, the struggle even to survive goes on today, needlessly. We must work to produce the goods and services we need and want. And because we consume what we produce, we must keep producing. So production is the foundation of society, how it begins and how it progresses. Everything else we do rests on how we produce what we need and want. Next, factors of production. These factors are the three things needed for production. To start, we need nature's raw materials, and because the land is the source of most of them, economists used to call raw materials land. The second factor is means of production. Tools, machines, buildings, power, transport, and so on. Things we need in order to produce things. Economists call these capital. The more raw materials and capital we have, or the better their quality, the more productive we are. The third factor of production is labour. But we must work to gather raw materials and produce capital. So raw materials, in effect, and capital are products. And on their own, they don't produce anything. Labour is the only truly productive factor. Workers produce all the economic wealth in society, and we always have. The question is, who owns that wealth? Next, specialisation. If we all specialise on what we're good at or enjoy doing, we can produce more and better things. So some of us farm, bake, make clothes, build, heal, teach, and so on. Specialists have the time, experience, and knowledge to improve tools and skills. But specialisation means we must cooperate to survive and progress. We have to share what each of us produces, and we all benefit as a consequence. Specialisation emerges naturally from social need and individual abilities, and it makes us collectively much more productive. Nowadays, huge amounts of specialisation go into many of even the simplest products and services. But for specialisation to be efficient, we must all have the same freedom and opportunity to find and develop our talents. We must all have the same advantages in life. Relative poverty and lack of opportunity waste individual talents and creativity, and we all suffer as a consequence. Next, exchange. The more we specialise and depend on each other, the more important exchange becomes. To start with, we share out what we produce by barter. How much we give in exchange depends roughly on how much work goes into each product, raw materials, capital, training, and so on. But for an exchange to be fair, it must be free on both sides. We must be free to exchange our products as we wish, and that can happen only if we own or have control over our products. If we don't have the power to exchange them as we wish. Next, money. As production and trade develop, it becomes easier to exchange all products for one particular product. Usually it's precious metals such as gold and silver. But whatever product we use, money emerges as the measure of value. Most kinds of money don't have another practical use. For example, we can't eat, wear, or live in money. And money isn't a means of production. We can't use it to make other things. Money is just a means to exchange products. The price of any product just shows how much of another product we can exchange it for. But money creates powerful illusions. It takes on a life of its own. When we use money, we no longer feel we're exchanging our products with each other. Money makes us forget the social cooperative nature of production. And money paid as wages makes it easier for employers to disguise their exploitation of our labour. Next, supply and demand. We produce what other people will exchange for what they produce, so supply tends to rise to meet demand. Things can go wrong when we overproduce or there's a shortage, perhaps because of war or natural disaster. And this will affect production and prices for a while, but demand usually brings supply back into balance, regulating production and prices in everyone's interest. However, demand and need are not the same. And just to break off here, I'm referring to the way economists use the word demand, which usually refers to paying for things. So demand isn't wanting things, it's paying for things and therefore being able to pay for things. So, however, demand and need are not the same. We may need or want a product, but we only demand it when we can and do pay for it. So, for supply and demand to work fairly, by regulating production and prices in everyone's interest equally, we must all have the same power to demand. Economic inequality means the mechanism of supply and demand, sometimes it's demand and supply, can't work equally well for all of us. Next, surplus. If we make enough of a product for our own needs or to exchange it for the other things we need, we break even. Then any more of the product we make will be a surplus. With a surplus, we can demand more products, which means others will produce more, better, or different things for us. Or we may choose to exchange the surplus for more raw material or capital and produce more ourselves. Either way, production expands when we produce a surplus. The population, including the labour force, grows and civilization can emerge. But whoever owns what we produce also owns the surplus, and they can decide who consumes it or how to invest it in more production. Controlling what we produce, and therefore the surplus, is the key to wealth and power in any society. And environmental decisions about reducing or redirecting production and consumption are in the hands of those who control what we produce. Next, self-interest. If we produce more of what other people want, or things of better quality, we can then exchange them for more things or things of better quality that they produce. And collectively we decide what society produces by demanding more or less of a product. So, in theory, individual self-interests combine to organise social production in the most efficient way to meet everyone's needs and wants. But in an unequal society, self-interest leads to selfishness and conflict. The rich can always demand more of what they want, luxuries and weapons to defend their wealth, for example, things we can't afford or may not want. And we may have to turn against each other in the struggle to avoid or escape from poverty or to better ourselves. In fact, it's in everyone's interest for each of us to be as wealthy and productive as possible. If everyone's richer, I'm richer, because they can produce more and demand more of my product. So relative poverty holds us all back. We depend on each other, but economic inequality disguises and distorts our collective interest. And I like to put it like this. A chain is as strong as its weakest link. So if all the links are as strong as the strongest, the chain is as strong as it can be. Next, ownership. Raw materials and capital don't produce anything. But we need them because we have to produce to survive and progress. So the people who own raw materials, such as landowners, and capital have the power to make us support and enrich them with our labour. Wealth is power. In an agricultural society, for example, social power comes from owning land, the source of raw materials. So the landlord class has ruled most societies until recently. Notice the original meaning of the word landlord. But now capital has become the more important source of wealth, and capitalists have taken over social and political power, though landowners and landlords are often still wealthy and powerful people. Ownership produces nothing. Only work produces economic wealth. The great divide and struggle between us and our rulers began long ago, and it's still with us today. All that's changed is who our rulers are and how they exploit us. Next, private property. There are two kinds of private property. Personal private property is our possessions, including possibly our homes. And for most of us, plentiful or good quality possessions are at least part of the good life. Now, a sensible economic system would allow us to produce goods and services as abundantly and sustainably as possible for all of us equally, here and around the world. With shared plenty, there'd be little reason for theft and the conflicts that come from inequality. If we have something, there's little reason to steal that thing from someone else. But the other kind of private property is land and capital, the sources of our rulers' wealth and power. The point of this productive private property is to control the means of production, and so to own or control what we produce. We're told that private property is sacred, but this deliberately blurs the distinction between the two kinds of private property. Most of us want the freedom to enjoy our personal private property in peace. I know I do. But productive private property used to profit from other people's labour is quite different. This denies our freedom to produce what we all want and exchange it as we wish. We could own productive land and capital collectively and control them democratically for everyone's benefit. But that would mean the end of economic inequality, the greater wealth of landowners and capitalists, and the social power that goes with it. So most of them oppose the idea, and some do everything they can to suppress it. So here's a summary of what I've just been saying, which you may find useful, I hope. Summary. 1. Production is the foundation of society, how it begins and how it progresses. 2. Raw materials and capital are products. They are not productive, and owning them is not productive. Labour is the only productive factor. 3. Specialisation increases our collective productivity, but it requires cooperation. The most efficient specialisation requires equal opportunity, and wealth means opportunity. 4. Fair exchange requires equality between participants, equal power to exchange our products as we wish. This can happen only if we own or control our products. 5. Only the equal power to demand, which means pay for things, can regulate supply, the production of things, in everyone's best interest equally. 6. Ownership of the product means control of the surplus, which means social power. 7. Individual self-interest depends directly on collective interest, and a chain is as strong as its weakest link. Economic inequality holds us all back. Okay, so that's the end of part 1. I hope you found that useful or interesting. If you have any comments, please leave them at the website. But for now, goodbye.